the waterfall is one of my favorite subjects to talk about because it's how investors get paid. So how the money flows from the property to the investors. So the simplest way would be a straight split, right? 80% goes to the investors and 20% goes to the sponsors. And some people will say that they like this but the best because it's the simplest. But just because it's the simplest doesn't mean it's the best for the investors because in this kind of split, the investor doesn't get any priority. Their money is not more special than everyone else's, right? So another waterfall will have something called a preferred return. Preferred return. And what that means is up until a certain percentage, 100% of the profits will go to the investor. So you can see already how getting 100% of the profits until a certain number is better than 80%, right? And I like to think preferred return is the value or the reward that you're getting as an investor for taking a risk on an investment that you don't have control, right? So that the first money flowing out of the property in terms of profit goes to you as an investor, right? And you'll see anywhere from 6 to 10%. And that is a per year basis. So that means that we or any other syndicator needs to get you a 6 to 10% before per year before that the sponsor sees profit, right? So typically in the first couple of years, they'll give 2, 3, 4% cash on cash. 2 to 4% cash on cash, right? So this is a lot lower than this, right? So then you got to figure out what happens. And this is because in the first couple of years, you're enacting the business plan, you're doing renovations, you're trying to make the property better, right? Usually properties don't cash flow this well right off the beginning, right? Because if they do, it has to make you wonder, why are they selling the property if it's doing so well? It means it's probably stabilized and there's not much opportunity to increase value. Now, there's properties that cash flow pretty well, but at the end, you're not going to get that bump, right? And that's kind of the increase in sales prices a lot of times why we invest, right? So there's a couple things that can happen. So if I give you, say, 4% in the first year, then usually what happens is this preferred return accrues. Meaning that if I give you 4% and I promised you, let's say 8, that means next year I owe you 12%. And it keeps going until that full amount gets paid off. So say the next year, instead of 4%, I give you 8%. I actually owe you 12. So that another 4% gets moved on, bumped to the next year. And it keeps going until the property's sold. So so that means you're getting 100% of these profits until that becomes true, right? So I like this as an investor because it really shows that up until a certain amount, this preferred return amount, which is usually 6 to 10%, which I'm happy with a 6 to 10% return on my money in the beginning, right? So for if this becomes true in a single year, you go down the next part of the waterfall, right? So if you look at the waterfall, it's usually buckets, right? Buckets, it goes into here, and then buckets here, and then buckets here, right? So the straight split would just be one bucket, right? 80-20. 80-20. This one would be, right, preferred return, let's say 8%. 8% pref. And then the question would be, okay, what is happening next, right? So what could happen next is either you go to this split, right? So a lot of times I'll see after you get 8%, you'll get 80-20. right? Or 70-30, 70-30, or 75-25, right? However, what's different about Sunrise on Chandler is the bucket goes like this. It goes 8%, then return of capital, then 75-20. And the reason that we like return of capital is it really de-risks you. Because, for example, say I have this one, right? 8% preferred return followed by 80-20. And after the first year, someone offered to buy this property for purchase price, let's say they offered to buy it at 10%, right? They offered to buy it at 10% of value, right? This is just a hypothetical situation. I give you 8%, I'll give you that 8%. And then out of that 2% that's left, we split it 80-20. So you haven't gotten your money back, but we're already splitting the profits, right? So in this hypothetical situation, you'll actually be losing money if I don't sell it, if I sell it for such a low price. However, in this situation, right, if it was this bucket with the return of capital in the same deal, right, you would get 8%, followed by this 2% would go to you as well, 100%, because I have to give you all your money back. So in a given year, if we catch you up on your full preferred return, you'll start getting your money back. So that means really on Sunrise on Chandler, for example, we're as a sponsor, we're not going to really see a profit because we get paid from this 25%. We're not going to see a profit until the very end, which is fine with us because remember, you as the investor, you're taking the risk with the investment. And we think there's going to be plenty of profit left over at the end to pay ourselves and to pay Sunrise. So that's why we like preferred return, return of capital, and then 75-25. And this actually changes depending on how much you invest. So if you put 150K or more, you get 9 pref, return of capital, and then 80-20. So it kind of goes up on how you invest. Now, there's a couple other ways to split it. There's something called hurdles. So here I have it pretty simple, right? 1, right? 2. But some people will say maybe, after you get a 16 IRR, after a 16 IRR, it goes into another bucket and now it's 50-50. Okay, I'll put this. 50-50 after 16 IR. We don't do this, which is why I put it up here. But that's another way to do it, and that's called a hurdle. So basically, after you meet this certain criteria, it gets splits, or maybe this will be 20 IRR. And the reasoning is that this is such a high IRR that the sponsor should be able to participate more in the profits. So this is if you guys have been listening to what's happening with Tesla and Elon trying to get his $1 billion bonus, he's saying that everyone is making so much money, he should get a larger part of the Tesla stock because he's making everyone so much money. Now, one other thing I have seen is called a catch-up. And so on Sunrise on Chandler, you will get 100% of the profits until 8%, followed by 100% of the profits until you get return of capital, right? And then you get 75% of the profits, and we get 25%. Now, some other people will say, after you get, let's say you get 6% by someone else, not. Okay. And you get 100% of those profits, right? They'll say, hey, it's pretty nice. And then maybe they'll say 100% they'll return of capital, right? They'll say, hey, it's pretty nice that you've gotten 6% per year and all your money back. It would really be nice for us sponsors to enjoy some of that profit as well. And they'll say, now sponsor, investor, investor, sponsor gets 100% until 6%. So they want to get to 6% as well, and then return on capital, right? So what this is called, it's called a catch-up. So it means the sponsor is catching up to the returns that the investor gets. And then they'll do like 75, 25. Investor, sponsor. So it's a very small, it'd be a very small line in the PPM, but it means that, after this 6% for this specific deal, and your money back, the sponsor is getting 100% of the capital back. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, depending on what you think. The 6% return and all your money back, pretty good, right? And then they're only getting the same thing as you, right? So the catch up isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just something to keep in. Let's see. Anyone have any questions? So the Sunrise on Chandler. So the investor gets 100% until 8% per year. And this accrues, meaning if we don't pay you 8% in any given year, whatever's left over will be added next time. Then the investor gets 100% of the profit until they get all of their money back, right? And if there's any given year that we're totally caught up and we beat that 8%, then we'll start giving you your money back. And then followed by investor 75% and sponsor 25%. And a lot of people are asking how we as Ascent get paid. We get paid from here. Oh, and then the other thing to keep in mind, very important, is there can be multiple waterfalls. So this is one waterfall, right? And this is the only waterfall in Sunrise on Chandler. However, if you're investing in someone that raises capital, for example, there might be a waterfall for them and then a waterfall on the property level. So it's important to ask, are there any other fees, other waterfalls that aren't discussed on this deck or our property level or sponsor level? So for us, this is the only way that money flows from the property, and we get paid out of this 25%. We also share in the fees, so there's no extra level of fees that investors are paying. So there was some confusion if we're a feeder fund or access fund or anything like that. No, our structure for this deal is that we're co-sponsors, so we're sharing in all the work. We're signing on the loan, for example, so we're having a very concrete and practical partnership in this specific deal. So for those of you that may not have heard about Sunrise on Chandler, I'll give you the basics. It's 177 units, built in 1985, 85. The current owner bought it is all in for 60 million. There's a loan on it for 50 million. We're buying it for 46.5 million. It's 97% occupied. And I've mentioned this in the past, but it's really important when you're looking at occupancy to also look at bad debt because I could shove anyone into a apartment, regardless of their credit score, their ability to pay, right? To kind of fudge the numbers to make it look good. So you always want to look at this combined with bad debt, right? Are people paying on time? Are there any evictions? Are there any concern? Are there any late payments, right? So the bad debt on this property is 20 for last month. Some month it's zero, some months it's 200 bucks. So it's pretty negligible. The property is going to cash flow monthly, immediately, because instead of a $50 million loan, we are getting a $30 million loan. So we're bringing a lot more money to the table, and it's 5 years fixed loan. So this is the best deal we've definitely seen all year. Probably the only deal that in terms of multifamily that we'll do. Last year we only did one deal the whole year. So there's just not many opportunities for those of you that have been looking at real estate. Prices are high and mortgages are high. And that's usually rare. They usually work inversely. Usually when mortgages go up, prices go down, right? And then prices go up, mortgages go down. No, but right now we're in weird post-COVID land where nothing makes sense in real estate. So there just haven't been as many opportunities as we've wanted. But this is probably the best we'll see all year. And we got a unique opportunity because the person who bought this deal got way too much loan on the property, and they made two mistakes. They got a variable rate loan and they got way too much leverage. So they got 90% leverage. You and I, when we'd buy a house, we'd have to put the down payment of 20%. They put a 10% down payment and also the variable rate loan. So the initial interest rate was about 3% when they bought it and then 9% now. So they just weren't able to cover it. However, usually when you see a property like this, you would expect it to be not run well, like, occupancy in the 80s or 70s even, because they ran out of money. But the properties run very well. And the other cool thing is it's only 11% renovated. So there's a lot of opportunity to increase value. And they're seeing like a $250 rent bump for all the properties that are renovated, but they just haven't had a chance. They ran out of money, so they haven't had a chance to do many renovations. Let me see if there's any questions. No. Anyone have any questions on syndications, on waterfalls? This is a pretty brief discussion about waterfalls, but it's super important because you can have the best deal in the world, but if all the money flows to the sponsor instead of you, then you're taking all this risk for not much return. So the name of the game is to get the highest returns for the lowest risk, right? So we always look at the risk of a property, right? So specifically for Chandler, there's a couple things that you would look for in terms of risk, right? So the biggest thing and the reason that most people have had issues with their properties is debt, right? So the way to get rid of that is you get fixed interest rate, right? Because that's the largest expense you have every month. So by knowing what that payment is going to be for the full 5 years, and our loan is fixed for 5 years and 5 years of interest only, right? So we don't have to pay down principal. The second thing on is being able to control your expenses, right? So there's three expenses that are unwieldy, right? For syndication. So one, interest rate, right? So your mortgage by far the big one. The second biggest one is your taxes, right? And along the South, taxes have been crazy. And there's been a lot of government shortfalls, and they've been trying to go after the people that own property to pay that off, especially commercial property. So taxes in Florida, Texas have been huge. The cool thing about Phoenix, where this property is in, is that your property taxes are capped at a 5% increase by the government. So you are able to predict what that is. And a lot of this game is prediction and knowing with surety what your expenses are going to be, right? And then you can kind of make decisions. So, and the third thing is insurance. So you may have heard of California and Florida where all these people are leaving, all these insurance companies are leaving because it's too expensive to insure people. And the insurance companies that are left are charging an arm and a leg for their insurance. So for example, in Florida, one of our properties, our insurance went 3x. So it went from 100,000 to 300,000. That's a lot of money, and that's money that we would have sent to our investors, right? So this the because Phoenix, and that's mostly because of natural disasters. So because Phoenix is relatively protected, no tornadoes, no hurricanes, no fires, that insurance costs are actually pretty reasonable. So that takes a lot of the risk off the table from insurance, from your taxes, from your interest rate loans. The property is going to be run by the same property manager that they love. You can actually look on Google reviews for Sunrise on Chandler. People love her. Nancy is her name. And so you take a lot of execution risk off the table because there's always disruption when you're bringing on a whole new team. But we're keeping the same team. We're working with them. Sunrise is operating the deal and they're going to stay on as well. So it takes a lot of the risk off the table because they've been running this property really well for the past 2 years.